Everything you thought you knew about history is wrong. The founders of civilization weren't the people you think they were, and the greatest empires of all time fell in ways you've never imagined. In the next 30 seconds, we're diving into the untold truths that shaped our world. Buckle up for the moments that will make you question everything. You'll be shocked by what's really behind the rise and fall of civilization, the birth of Homo sapiens. A battle for survival, supremacy, and the shocking truth we never talk about. Imagine walking the earth 300,000 years ago and realizing you're not the only human here. In fact, you're not even the most dominant species. Welcome to the era of multiple human species. And yes, they were all fighting to survive. We think Homo sapiens are the pinnacle of evolution. But what if that's all wrong? What if we didn't naturally rise to the top, but had to literally fight our way through generations of species who were just as advanced as us? Imagine staring down a towering Neanderthal, stronger, more resilient, and in many ways better adapted to the cold. Would you panic or would you fight for your place in history? We follow the eyes of an early Homo sapiens, unsure of their future, but desperate for survival. They're surrounded by other human species, each with their own strengths. The world is a minefield, and every misstep could mean extinction. What if Homo sapiens didn't win because we were the smartest, but because everyone else failed in ways we'll never understand? Could it be that Homo sapiens weren't destined for greatness, but simply lucky? The struggle for dominance wasn't just about intelligence, it was about chance. Did we survive because we were truly better, or did we simply outlast others who couldn't adapt quickly enough to radical changes? A moment of pure dread, the realization that Homo sapiens were not the superior species. Neanderthals were arguably stronger and better suited to the environment. So, why did we win? Through the eyes of a Homo sapiens struggling to understand their place in this crowded world, we begin to question everything we know about our supremacy. Perhaps luck, not logic, was on our side. You've been told that Homo sapiens triumphed due to our cognitive abilities. But here's the kicker. What if our superior minds weren't all they were cracked up to be? What if our biggest breakthrough was our ability to fail intelligently? Homo sapiens are often praised for their cognitive revolution, but let's be honest, was it the breakthrough that we thought it was? What if our cognitive abilities were actually dangerous, setting us on a path to self-destruction? A shocking revelation. Homo sapiens didn't just develop language and social structures to thrive, they developed them because they needed them. Without complex communication, they would have never survived the harsh realities of competition with other species. From the eyes of an early Homo sapiens, we see the confusion and hopefulness. The cognitive revolution wasn't an inevitability, it was a desperate, dangerous adaptation. And it worked. But how long would it last? What does it mean to be the dominant species? In Homo sapiens' case, it might have meant more harm than good. What if our success came at the expense of every other species? Homo sapiens' rise to global dominance wasn't smooth. In fact, it came with a high price tag. As we spread across the globe, we didn't just replace Neanderthals, we wiped them out. And what about all the other species we encountered along the way? Did we make the planet better, or did we simply change it forever? The first encounter with a new unknown species, were they allies or rivals? Did Homo sapiens see them as a threat, or was there something darker lurking beneath their survival instinct? Now we see through the eyes of an early Homo sapiens, who's part of a growing, conquering force, sometimes willing to make extreme choices to ensure survival. And as they spread, they wonder if their success will haunt them. We've reached the peak, but here's the shocking truth. The very thing that made us dominate might also be the thing that destroys us. History repeats itself. Will Homo sapiens be next? The rise of Homo sapiens set the stage for everything we know today. But the way we triumphed over other species is telling. Are we really the masters of our destiny, or are we a species running on borrowed time, destined to make the same mistakes over and over? The profound realization that Homo sapiens may not have been the inevitable winners, but rather a species simply lucky enough to overcome greater threats. The tension builds as they consider their own future. Could Homo sapiens eventually fall like every other species before them? Hey, if you're enjoying this journey through history and want to see more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be part of that milestone. Like, if you're enjoying the ride, comment with your thoughts or questions. Your input is what keeps this channel going, and share this video with your friends. Let's hit 1,000 together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. The agricultural revolution. You've been told farming is the greatest invention in human history. But what if that's a lie? What if the birth of agriculture wasn't the solution to survival, but the beginning of a crisis that will haunt us for thousands of years? The land is changing, and so are we. The new promise of a sedentary lifestyle seems like a miracle, but what if it's also a trap? What if the very act of planting could doom future generations? The first seed is sown. It's a simple act, but there's a nagging feeling in the pit of your stomach. Is this the beginning of a new dawn, or the start of an irreversible descent into dependency? Through the eyes of a young, hopeful farmer, innocent to the true consequences of their decision. They're caught between the excitement of a new world and the terror that what they're doing might actually be the worst thing for their people. This new method could bring food in abundance, but could it also bring famine? Could it imprison humanity in ways we can't even imagine yet? The question is, will this success last? Or is it the beginning of the end? What if the revolution was a mistake? What if these crops aren't the answer, but a death sentence? The land isn't giving what it promised. The crops are weak, the animals aren't cooperating, and your people are starting to starve. What now? A failed harvest could mean death for the entire tribe. This wasn't supposed to happen. Was farming supposed to make things easier or harder? What if we're trading one form of chaos for another, and it's already too late to turn back? The protagonist watches in horror as their hard work crumbles. All that time spent planting, and nothing to show for it. Tensions flare as some beg for a return to the old ways, hunting and foraging. But others insist that farming is the future. We see this chaos through the eyes of an elder, a person who once believed in the promise of farming, but now fears it may destroy everything. The elder struggles to convince the younger generation that their future might not be as certain as they think. The very thing they believed would ensure survival could destroy it. What if the revolution is actually a slow path to extinction? Can they recover from this failure? Or is this just the beginning of something much darker? What if the crops actually are growing? But the question is that a good thing? The land has begun to yield, but now the true cost is becoming clear. The plants are thriving, but so are the weeds. The wild animals are disappearing, and people are becoming slaves to the land. Is this success? Or is it the start of a terrifying new order? The crops are growing, but not without consequences. The people are becoming more dependent on the land. The once roaming groups of hunters and gatherers are now tied to their fields. The tension builds as some begin to resent their growing dependence. Will they become slaves to the crops they once planted? a moment of haunting realization. The protagonist sees how their people are slowly changing, unable to move as freely or as easily as before. The promise of stability has turned into an unexpected prison. Through the eyes of a middle-aged farmer who, while part of the new world of agriculture, begins to see the cracks forming in the system. They worry that the revolution that promised to free humanity is only going to tighten its grip. Things are thriving, but what if all this abundance is actually a trap? The people might not even know what they've signed up for yet. Will they ever break free from this new life? The land has been conquered. But what about the people? What about the society that's been born from this revolution? Cities are starting to form, trade routes are established, and governments are rising. But there's a catch. This isn't just a new chapter. It's a brand new problem, and it's about to go wildly out of control. Cities are sprouting up. Governments are beginning to take shape. But this isn't just a happy ending. With new settlements come new conflicts, and the old ways of working together are starting to collapse. People are fighting over resources. Hierarchies are forming. Who gets the land? Who gets the power? And who gets left behind? The protagonist is forced to confront the ugly side of progress: power. The very social structures that once seemed simple and egalitarian are becoming divided, leaving them wondering if this new world is worth the price. We see this through the eyes of a former leader of a small egalitarian community, now caught up in the chaotic rise of early cities. The protagonist starts to fear that the social changes brought about by agriculture may have created a monster they can't control. Cities are emerging. But what will they become? A force for good, or a breeding ground for corruption and inequality? What's the cost of this progress? This new world, the one we fought for, has become a place we don't recognize. The cities are thriving. Trade has exploded. But what's the cost? War, famine, inequality? The seeds we planted are now killing us in ways we didn't foresee. Was this agricultural revolution truly the answer, or the beginning of a slow spiral to destruction? The revolution succeeded, but at what cost? The cities are now bursting at the seams. Wealth has concentrated in the hands of a few. Power struggles have reached new heights. Disease has spread like wildfire. Was agriculture the solution, or was it the root of all the chaos that now surrounds them? The protagonist, now older and wiser, reflects on the legacy of the agricultural revolution. What was once a small step toward survival has spiraled into something far more complex and far more dangerous. What does this future hold? The protagonist now sees the world through the eyes of an elder who has witnessed the rise of civilization, but also its darker undercurrents. Their final question hangs in the air. What have we really gained? Civilization is here, but what will it become? Will we find a way to control the forces we've unleashed? Or will we become victims of our own success? The founding of the first cities, Sumerians. What if the first city you built wasn't a symbol of progress, but a tomb? A place where survival is guaranteed only for the elite? The first walls are rising, but will they protect you or imprison you? The birth of a city isn't the birth of civilization. It's a dangerous gamble. People are pouring resources into this new settlement, but what if it all falls apart? They don't know if this will bring prosperity or plunge them into chaos. The very act of settling in one place might destroy them. Can they outsmart nature, or are they about to bite off more than they can chew? The foundation of Uruk is almost set, but the questions are looming. What happens when a city is born from desperation rather than vision? What if this gamble is their last? Gilgamesh isn't just a king, he's a man who believes he is invincible. But in a city built on tension and struggle, power isn't a gift, it's a curse. Who will pay the price when kings think they're gods? Gilgamesh's arrogance threatens to unravel everything. He's not only struggling against rival factions in the city, he's challenging the gods themselves. Can a king push too far? What if he becomes a tyrant, driven by belief in his own immortality? The stakes are clear. One wrong move, and the city could burn in an instant. The question is, can Gilgamesh's confidence hold up against divine retribution, or will his overreach lead to a downfall? There's no middle ground. Either he becomes the ruler of all, or he loses everything. What if the first written language wasn't about record-keeping, but control? The scribes aren't just recording transactions. They're writing history and maybe even rewriting it. Who controls the story controls the future. Cuneiform could be the city's greatest gift, or its greatest curse. It's a new kind of power. Those who control the written word now control the flow of information. In a city built on lies and manipulation, what happens when the truth is distorted in ink? The written word may seem like progress, but it could become the most dangerous weapon in the hands of the powerful. The scribes aren't just chronicling events, they're shaping them. As the first records are set in clay, a dangerous question arises. What happens when the power to write history is taken away from the people? Gilgamesh has conquered the city, but the gods aren't done with him. When a king believes he's above the divine, the consequences can be deadly. The gods are testing him, and they might be testing the city itself. The gods demand balance. Gilgamesh, having defied them, now faces their wrath. Enkidu, the wild man sent to humble him, isn't just a physical challenge. He's a reminder of the consequences of hubris. What happens when a king goes too far? Is the city's fate tied to the king's arrogance? Or does the universe have its own plans? Gilgamesh has already made enemies of the gods. What happens when those enemies decide to strike back? Will the city survive the wrath of forces far greater than kings and scribes? The city of Uruk stands, but at what cost? What happens when the myth of a king becomes more powerful than the reality? When a man's ambition lives on as a legend, does it still matter if the city thrives? The city survives, but the legend of Gilgamesh has taken on a life of its own. Can a civilization built on myth really stand the test of time? Legends can't feed the people, and stories can't protect the city from real threats. As the city grows, will it be able to handle the weight of its own history? The myth of Gilgamesh may have shaped the city, but myths don't rule cities. People do. The myth of Gilgamesh has outlived the man. But does that myth still matter, or has it become a dangerous anchor? Will the very legend that built the city now tear it apart? Can Uruk thrive, or will the weight of its own history crush it underfoot? The Code of Hammurabi. Imagine a king who believes he can shape the world's moral fabric, who thinks a written code will give him ultimate control over his empire. But what if this is the exact moment when everything starts to fall apart? Hammurabi is determined to create the first legal code, promising justice for all. But the stakes aren't just about order. The law he creates will either stabilize his empire or cement his downfall. In a world where the poor are crushed, the rich thrive, and chaos reigns, can one king really impose a law that holds all people equally accountable? Or will his code simply deepen the divide between the powerful and the powerless? He promises peace and fairness, but who benefits when everything is written in stone? A king with an iron fist, an empire on the edge. What could go wrong? What if the very laws Hammurabi created to protect his people were also the tools that enslaved them? What happens when justice becomes a weapon of control? Hammurabi's code is about to be set in stone, and while it sounds just, it's already starting to show cracks. Who decides what's just? What happens when the law doesn't just punish criminals, but punishes the powerless, the vulnerable, and the poor? For those at the bottom of the social ladder, these laws may bring nothing but suffering. If a person's punishment depends on their social status, is it really justice? What happens when the law is applied unequally, even as it's supposed to be universal? Hammurabi's code is public now. Imagine the chaos. The poor have no power to change it. The elite are ready to use it to their advantage. What happens when the very foundation of justice becomes the new instrument of oppression? The laws are written, the king has spoken, but what happens when the public starts reading the laws? What if the citizens, both the oppressed and the elite, start questioning the very system they're now forced to follow? Hammurabi's code is now public and posted for all to see. But with transparency comes a new problem: scrutiny. What if the people start to see the cracks in the system? What happens when citizens realize that a system designed to protect them may actually be rigged against them? The code isn't just about punishment, it's about power. And now the citizens of Babylon can see that in black and white. What happens when the very people who've been bound by the law start questioning it? As the laws spread, it's not just about legal proceedings, it's about societal upheaval. Who will follow these laws without question? Who will rebel? What happens when a public trial of justice begins in the streets? Will Hammurabi's code hold up, or will it crumble? Hammurabi's vision of a just society is slowly morphing into something far darker. The law wasn't just a system for justice. It's becoming a means to solidify power. What happens when the system you built to protect people becomes the very system that subjugates them? The law is supposed to bring equality, but what if Hammurabi's code simply enshrines inequality? The rich have the resources to manipulate the law, the poor are punished harshly, and the system now enforces class distinctions as a matter of law. What happens when the law that was meant to protect the empire becomes its own tool of division? As the elite grow more powerful and the poor grow weaker, will Hammurabi's code be the thing that holds society together or rips it apart? Is Hammurabi a hero or just another tyrant in disguise? He might have created one of the first legal systems, but is it truly justice, or is it just the first step toward greater authoritarian control? As the cracks deepen, what happens when the people begin to see the law as the enemy? The Code of Hammurabi is remembered for centuries, but is it remembered as a triumph of justice or as the blueprint for future tyranny? What happens when the law itself becomes a symbol of oppression? Hammurabi's legacy is undeniable. The code laid the groundwork for future legal systems. But was it truly a step forward for justice, or simply a means for rulers to gain control? What happens when the very laws meant to guide society become instruments of oppression, used by future rulers to maintain power? The code might have unified Babylon, but it also laid the foundation for all legal systems to come. Did Hammurabi truly create justice, or did he simply give rulers the tools to control their citizens forever? The Code of Hammurabi endures. But when we look back, we have to ask, was it the start of justice for all, or was it just the first stone in the foundation of legal tyranny? Will future civilizations follow in Hammurabi's footsteps, or learn from his mistakes? The Code of Hammurabi was a revolutionary moment in history, but it wasn't without its dark side. The question isn't just whether Hammurabi's laws were fair, they may have been necessary for their time, but whether they were the foundation for something that went beyond justice and delved into control. The code might be remembered as the birth of legal systems, but its legacy is more complicated than that. What happens when laws are used not for equality, but for power? Hammurabi's vision may have been grand, but the consequences of that vision echo into history, shaping the very systems that control us today. The birth of democracy in Athens. Athens is on the edge. Tyranny has choked its freedom, and its people are caught in a deadly game between the elite and the oppressed. But what if one man's vision could not only save the city, but unravel it completely? The city is at its breaking point. Cleisthenes proposes a radical change, democracy. But it's not just a political shift. This is a gamble that could either give the people power or tear Athens apart. Cleisthenes isn't just attempting to change the government, he's questioning the very core of Athenian society. What if the people, unprepared for their own power, destroy themselves in the process? Athens is hanging by a thread. This isn't about reform. It's about whether the city survives at all. Democracy is the answer, or is it? Cleisthenes is pushing a radical agenda. But what if the people are too divided to embrace it? What happens when giving power to the people is the biggest mistake you could make? What if the people, once given power, turn on each other? Will Athens find unity or descend into chaos? Cleisthenes has made his move. The first reforms are in place, but what happens when power is transferred from the few to the many? What if the people now in control prove to be just as corrupt and power-hungry as the aristocrats they replaced? Cleisthenes redefines Athens, but the new system isn't as flawless as he imagined. Power is no longer concentrated in the hands of the elite, but will the citizens rise to the occasion or betray the very ideals of democracy? The reforms were meant to bring equality, but what if they only deepen divisions? Ordinary citizens now have a say, but can they be trusted to wield power responsibly? Democracy isn't an ideal, it's a battle, and Cleisthenes is risking everything for it. Democracy is the new hope, but can it survive in a world where the people are so fragmented and hungry for power? The reforms may have given the people control, but at what cost? What if democracy itself turns against Athens? What happens when power is given to those who've never had it? Will they fight for freedom or fight for their own survival? For the first time in history, Athens citizens have a say in their fate. But what happens when the masses, empowered but unprepared, start making choices that will shape the future? What if democracy itself begins to unravel? The people are supposed to be the rulers now, but the political landscape is more chaotic than ever. With power decentralized, factions form and conflict escalates. The city has become a battleground of competing ideas, and not everyone agrees on what democracy should look like. Cleisthenes' vision is shattered as Athens descends into infighting, and democracy risks being torn apart before it even matures. Can a fragile, nascent democracy survive under the weight of such instability? Or will it collapse under the strain of too many voices, too many desires, and too much power? Democracy was meant to bring unity, but instead it's tearing Athens apart. Can a system founded on idealism handle the brutal reality of human nature? And if democracy falls here, will it ever rise again? What happens when the system you fought to create starts to destroy itself? Will Athens rebuild, or will it revert to the tyrannical rule it sought to escape? The dream of democracy has turned into a nightmare. Cleisthenes' reforms may have failed, but the question is, who's responsible? Is it the system that's flawed, or the people who cannot manage the power they were given? The idealistic dream of democracy has been tainted by betrayal. Those in power are starting to use democracy to solidify their own positions, turning the system into another form of tyranny. The rich and powerful are exploiting the system, while the poor grow disillusioned. The question now, Can Athens ever truly escape the trap of authoritarianism? Or is democracy itself doomed to fail? Every reform, every attempt at justice is being undermined by those who seek to control the system for their own gain. And the worst part, the people are starting to accept it. Democracy was supposed to be the answer, but now it's the problem. Cleisthenes' dream has become a hollow shell, and Athens faces a stark choice: fight to preserve the idea of democracy or return to the old ways of rule. What happens when the people who are supposed to benefit from democracy are betrayed by the very system they believed in? Is this the end of Athens' democratic experiment, or just the beginning of its next phase? Athens stands at the precipice. The system has been tested, twisted, and betrayed. But what if there's still a chance for democracy to survive? Or has the experiment already failed beyond repair? The future of Athens hangs in the balance. Cleisthenes' reforms were a bold attempt to create something new, but now it's unclear whether the city can endure as a democracy. The lessons of power, betrayal, and corruption have torn Athens apart, and the people are questioning whether democracy was ever worth it. What happens when the system you fought to build seems to be collapsing in real time? Athens may have created a foundation for democracy, but can the city endure the consequences of that foundation? The ultimate question remains: was democracy the answer, or the beginning of a new kind of tyranny? Athens' experiment with democracy could have changed the world. But what if it's a doomed experiment? The final chapter of democracy in Athens is still being written. Will the people fight to reclaim their future, or let history decide for them? What now? Will Athens rise to embrace democracy once again, or will it abandon it forever? The city's future hangs by a thread, and the answer is far from clear. The birth of democracy in Athens wasn't a neat and tidy process. It was a volatile, uncertain, and often violent experiment. Cleisthenes' vision, while groundbreaking, set in motion a series of power struggles and ethical dilemmas that revealed the very fragility of democracy. Athens' attempts to create a government of the people came at a high cost, and while it left a legacy, it also exposed the deep flaws inherent in systems of power. Democracy might have survived in the end, but not without compromises and challenges. The truth about the birth of democracy in Athens isn't a tale of simple victory. It's the story of a city that reached for something idealistic and found out just how messy and dangerous those ideals can become when placed in the hands of the many. The real question isn't just whether Athens succeeded in creating a democracy. It's whether the dream of democracy itself is sustainable in a world of human frailty, betrayal, and the ever-present hunger for power. The conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great. Imagine a king who dreams not just of ruling the world, but of shaping it to fit his own image. But what happens when the very man who believes he can change the world is the one who risks destroying it? Alexander, fresh from the death of his father, takes the throne of Macedon. What begins as a noble quest to avenge his father and unite the Greek states quickly spirals into something darker. He dreams of spreading Greek culture, but is that ambition enough to justify the devastation he's about to unleash? His quest for greatness may leave a legacy, but at what cost? Is he truly building an empire, or is he preparing for his own self-destruction? Alexander's reputation precedes him, an unstoppable conqueror, a visionary. But who is he really? Is he driven by a genuine desire for change, or by an insatiable hunger for control? What happens when his vision is no longer about culture, but about complete dominance? What happens when ambition blinds a king to the destruction he causes? Can Alexander's idealism survive the reality of his actions? Alexander sweeps across Persia like a storm, defeating King Darius in battle after battle. But with each victory, the question grows louder. Is he truly conquering or just creating more enemies? As Alexander marches through Persia, his military genius is undeniable. But the deeper he pushes, the more evident it becomes. The Persian Empire is vast, and its inhabitants are far from compliant. With every city he conquers, Alexander faces more resistance, not just from soldiers, but from the very cultures he's trying to conquer. What happens when an invader's vision collides with the very identity of the people he's conquering? The bloodshed seems endless. Alexander's ambition is growing, but so is the cost. The Persian Empire is on the brink of collapse. But what happens when Alexander's victories come at the expense of the very vision he's trying to build? His dreams of Hellenization start to feel more like cultural domination. Can he keep up the momentum, or will his conquests spiral out of control? Can Alexander continue conquering at this pace, or will the very forces he's trying to control turn against him? Alexander stands victorious. He's conquered Persia, but now he faces a far greater enemy, the empire he's built, which is beginning to crumble from within. As Alexander pushes eastward, his men are weary, his resources stretch thin, and his soldiers grow increasingly disillusioned. The rebellion isn't coming from the Persian people, it's coming from within his ranks. Alexander's soldiers, tired of endless campaigns, mutiny. The very men who followed him into battle begin to question his vision. Is he leading them to glory or to an endless war of attrition? The man who was once a beacon of hope and ambition is now a tyrant in their eyes. Alexander's ambition isn't just threatening the people he's conquered, it's eating away at the very heart of his own empire. What happens when those closest to you turn against you? Will Alexander crush the rebellion, or will the cracks in his empire begin to show? Will Alexander's unyielding vision survive the fractures within his own army? The march into India was supposed to be the final triumph, but when Alexander faces King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes, something unexpected happens. Alexander meets his first true defeat, not in battle, but in his own psyche. The Battle of the Hydaspes is one of Alexander's greatest military achievements, but the victory feels hollow. The sheer exhaustion, the loss of countless men, and the fear of what lies beyond push Alexander to the breaking point. His soldiers, broken by constant war, refuse to go further. This isn't just a battle for land, it's a fight for the soul of his empire. Alexander's vision of a united Hellenistic world begins to feel impossible. Is his dream worth the suffering of his men and the legacy of endless war? Alexander may have won the battle, but has he lost his army? What happens when a conqueror finally faces his limits? How far can a man push before his vision becomes a curse? Does Alexander have the strength to push forward, or will his empire collapse under the weight of its own ambition? Alexander returns from India, his empire immense but fragile. But what happens when the king who sought immortality faces his own mortality? Alexander's journey reaches its tragic end as he succumbs to illness at the age of 32. His empire, vast and sprawling, is left in tatters. His dream of uniting the world under a single banner of Hellenism ends not in triumph, but in bitter division. What was the point of all this conquest? His death leaves the empire leaderless, and his men are scattered. His grand vision dies with him, and the people? They're left with the aftermath, a world irreparably altered by Alexander's ambition. The man who dreamed of immortality is dead, and his empire fades away. What does his legacy truly mean? Was it worth the bloodshed and the destruction? Did Alexander truly shape the world, or was he a warning to those who try to play God? What now? Will Alexander's name live on as a conqueror, or will his empire's decay reveal the truth behind his vision? Alexander the Great's conquest was not a story of triumph. It was a tale of dangerous ambition, unstoppable momentum, and uncontrollable consequences. His vision of a unified world under Greek culture was grand, but it was also a fatal pursuit that consumed him. Alexander's brilliance lay not only in his military genius, but in his deep psychological flaws. His drive for immortality led to a vast empire, but it also led to his downfall. The real question isn't whether Alexander succeeded. It's whether anyone could have succeeded in his place. His empire collapsed because it was built on fragility and illusion. Alexander's ambition, unchecked by moral or personal boundaries, was the very thing that doomed him. He became a legend not just because of his victories, but because he pushed the world too far, too fast. Alexander's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy, what remains, is a warning. Greatness doesn't come without cost, and sometimes the price of power is more than anyone can bear. The true tragedy of Alexander is that his vision, though brilliant, was too big for any one man or empire to control. The founding of the Roman Republic. Imagine a city ruled by a king who is overthrown, only to have the people replace him with something even more dangerous. What happens when the end of a monarchy sparks the birth of an empire that thrives on betrayal? King Tarquin the Proud has just been driven from Rome, but the people's joy hides a terrifying truth. The real power shift isn't about freedom. It's about replacing one tyrant with a new kind of rule, one that divides, manipulates, and keeps the masses in check. The Romans have just removed their king, but the elites are already maneuvering to ensure they stay in power. In their desire for freedom, the people may have unwittingly laid the foundation for a new form of oppression. The idea of freedom is alluring, but what happens when Rome's founding is built in deception? Are the people truly free, or is this just the beginning of another tyranny? What happens when the supposed birth of democracy begins with betrayal? Will the Roman people get the freedom they crave, or have they just exchanged one set of chains for another? The Romans are trying to create a republic, but what happens when the very system they build is rooted in the compromise between the rich and powerful? Is this truly a republic, or a political scheme in disguise? The early days of the Roman Republic are not about idealism or justice. They're about securing the power of the elite. A new system is proposed, a mixed government where consuls, senators, and the people all have a say. But what if the very people who are supposed to represent the masses are actually using the system to further their own interests? What happens when the republic is a thinly veiled excuse to keep the aristocracy in power? Rome's new system promises equality, but does it actually deliver? What if this republic is just another system designed to hold down the common people and consolidate the power of the aristocrats? Can the republic hold its ground, or will the hidden hands of the elite tear it apart from within? The republic's new government is up and running, but the deeper you look, the more you realize this isn't democracy. It's a battleground for the elite, and the people are mere pawns. What happens when the promise of power actually divides Rome more than it unites? Factions have begun to form, each with their own agenda. The plebeians want a voice, but the patricians are determined to keep control. Rome's republic isn't a victory for the masses. It's a tug-of-war between the rich and the poor. The plebeians rise up, demanding more power, while the patricians manipulate the new system to keep them in check. The system isn't working. It's splintering. The common people are frustrated, and the political elite are digging in their heels. Power at this point is no longer about fairness, it's about survival. Can the Roman Republic endure when it's so divided from within? What happens when the people realize they've been given power in name only? Will the Republic collapse under the weight of its own divisions? Or will Rome's elite find a way to tighten their grip on power? What happens when the very system meant to protect the people becomes a tool for the elites to manipulate, betray, and control the masses? Is this republic any better than the monarchy they overthrew? The republic is spiraling toward collapse. Political leaders use the system for personal gain, and alliances are broken in the name of expedience. Senators betray each other, military leaders use their troops for political leverage, and Rome's sense of unity is shattered. This isn't democracy, it's a game of power, played by the rich and powerful. The republic that was supposed to represent the people is now a tool for the elite to suppress the masses. Rome was built on the idea of a republic, but what happens when the republic becomes the problem? Is this really freedom or just a more sophisticated form of tyranny? Will Rome survive its own corruption, or is this the beginning of a new tyranny, one that looks a lot like the monarchy they just overthrew? Rome's republic has survived, barely. But at what cost? What happens when a republic built on shaky compromises leads to an empire built on sheer force? As Rome's power expands, so do its internal problems. The republic may have lived on in name, but the true nature of Roman power is shifting. The military is becoming the real power behind the throne, and leaders like Julius Caesar begin to emerge as strongmen, not republicans. The republic is a shadow of its former self, powerful on the outside, but hollow at its core. The Roman Republic was never truly sustainable. It was always an experiment that relied on the balance of power, which is now collapsing. What happens when a republic becomes an empire? Can Rome hold on to its ideals, or is it doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Rome's republic is a fleeting experiment, a prelude to the empire that will rise from its ashes. The dream of democracy is dead, and what emerges in its place is an empire. Will the people ever truly have power? Or was Rome always destined to rule by force? Has the republic truly failed, or is the empire the natural evolution of Rome's destiny? The founding of the Roman Republic was not the birth of an ideal government. It was the start of a long, violent struggle for power. While the Republic held the promise of fairness and democracy, it was built on contradictions and compromises that ultimately led to internal decay. Power struggles, betrayal, and manipulation were part of the system from the very beginning, and the Republic's failure to sustain itself set the stage for the rise of the Roman Empire. The real lesson of the Roman Republic is that democracy is fragile, and even the most noble political experiments can fall victim to human ambition and greed. Rome's story is a warning about the dangers of power and how easily it can slip from the hands of the people into the hands of the few. What began as an experiment in republican government ended with an empire, a symbol of both Rome's incredible potential and its tragic flaws. In the end, the Republic was never really about the people. It was about control, manipulation, and the endless battle for power. And Rome's future would always be defined by that struggle. The birth of Christ. A child is born, but his birth isn't a moment of joy. It's a threat to everything that came before. What happens when a prophecy disrupts the status quo and the world isn't ready for a savior? The birth of Jesus is no ordinary event. It's a subversive force in the making. The political climate of Judea is unstable, controlled by Roman power and an insecure local ruler. The story of Jesus' birth, as beautiful as it is, carries with it the seeds of rebellion. Herod's decree to kill all male children reveals a deep-seated fear of change. This child isn't born into a peaceful world, but into one suspicious of anything that threatens the status quo. The immediate tension of Jesus' birth is apocalyptic. Does the arrival of the Messiah offer salvation, or does it herald a coming storm? The people are unsure, but history is already being rewritten. A king is born, but not the kind anyone expects. The world is on edge. What will this child bring? Redemption or destruction? Is this the birth of hope or the beginning of a war that will tear everything apart? He was meant to bring peace, but his message threatens to tear down everything that has ever been built. What happens when the Savior isn't interested in saving the world, but transforming it? Jesus begins his ministry, and with it comes disruption. His message of love, forgiveness, in the kingdom of God stands in direct opposition to everything the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities hold dear. Jesus is attacking the power structures, not just preaching to the poor and downtrodden, but mocking the elites who have power. The Pharisees and Sadducees feel threatened, as do the Roman rulers who rely on the status quo. Jesus isn't just coming to save souls. He's coming to overturn empires. His challenge isn't just theological, it's political. But the problem is anyone ready to listen? What if his radical message is misunderstood, or worse, misinterpreted as a call for rebellion? The more Jesus speaks, the louder the opposition becomes. Will he be the liberator the people need, or will he become the very cause of their destruction? Will the people embrace his truth, or will they reject it and reject him? It was always going to end in betrayal, but what happens when the very act of salvation becomes the most human experience of pain and loss? Jesus' mission has reached its breaking point. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Roman authorities are closing in, and the people who once followed him now feel betrayed by his message. But Jesus isn't just confronting external threats. He's facing his own inner conflict. The Messiah isn't some passive figure. He's someone who actively chooses to lay down his life. But why? Why embrace the cross? Why choose this path of excruciating sacrifice? Is it truly God's will, or is it a fatal mistake born from the immense weight of his mission? The humanity of Jesus emerges, a man who, despite knowing the outcome, still struggles with his fate. This isn't a hero marching willingly toward death. It's a man wrestling with his own vulnerability. The ultimate question looms: can Jesus truly embrace his mission? Or will the unbearable weight of his sacrifice crush him before it even begins? Will Jesus face the unimaginable pain, or will his human side falter in the face of divine destiny? It is finished. The cross looms large. But what happens when death isn't the end of a movement, but the beginning of one? Jesus is crucified, but in his death, the real battle begins. What's shocking is not just the brutality of the execution, but its spiritual significance. Jesus' death isn't a tragic end. It's the beginning of a cultural revolution that will shatter everything that came before. But what if that revolution is a dangerous gamble? Will his followers understand the depth of his sacrifice, or will they be scattered by their fear? His disciples are lost. His followers are disillusioned. The world appears to have won, but Jesus' message isn't dead. It's growing in the shadows, setting the stage for a new faith that will rip through history. The question is, can anyone carry it forward, or will his movement die with him? The story of Christ doesn't end at the cross, but with a resurrection that nobody expects. What will happen when the impossible becomes reality? Is this truly the end of Jesus' story, or will the seed of his revolution blossom in the most unexpected ways? The stone is rolled away. What happens when the impossible occurs and the world is forever changed? Jesus rises from the dead, and with his resurrection comes a force that will change the world forever. But the true shock isn't the resurrection itself. It's the immediate consequences. The Roman authorities are terrified, the Jewish leaders are enraged, and the followers are confused and fearful. What happens when a movement, born in obscurity, nurtured through betrayal, and tested through death, explodes into the world stage? Christianity begins as a small movement in a corner of the Roman Empire, but within a few centuries, it will become the dominant force in the Western world. The problem: can this new faith survive the growing opposition from those who fear its power? Christianity spreads like wildfire, but can it survive in a world that resists its message? What happens when a movement that started in humility takes over an empire built on power? Will Christianity spread across the globe, or will it be crushed before it can change the world? The birth, death, and resurrection of Christ is not just a religious story. It's the ultimate cultural, political, and spiritual revolution. What began as a whisper of hope in Bethlehem became a roaring tide that reshaped the very fabric of human history. Jesus Christ's life, his teachings, and his ultimate sacrifice were far more than simple religious acts. They were a cosmic confrontation between divine destiny and human fragility. The unexpected nature of his life, the sacrifice, the betrayal, the resurrection, wasn't just the birth of Christianity. It was the birth of a new world, one that would rise from the ashes of defeat and persecution into a force that would reshape the future of civilization. The world wasn't ready for Christ, and maybe, just maybe, the world will never fully understand the revolution that began with his birth. But one thing is certain: the ripple effects of his life will never stop. The fall of the Roman Empire. Rome was built on power, but what happens when the empire's very foundation starts to crack? What if the greatest empire in history was always weakened from within? The Roman Empire, once untouchable, is collapsing from the inside. Decades of mismanagement, corruption, and political rot have made it vulnerable to external threats. The people once united under Roman law and culture now feel abandoned by their leaders. The emperors, chosen not for their ability to rule, but for their family name or political connections, are losing the loyalty of the military. The elite grow richer and more disconnected from the masses, while the common people grow restless, plagued by famine and taxes. What happens when the very system that once unified the known world now turns in on itself? The signs of Rome's collapse are everywhere, but can anyone see them in time? As the empire turns inward, can Rome survive long enough to face the external threats closing in? The cracks are widening, but who will be left to repair the empire? Or will the empire be allowed to crumble? Rome's enemies aren't just outside its walls. What happens when the ambition of its rulers turns Rome's greatest strength into its deadliest weakness? Rome's leaders, now more desperate than ever to hold on to power, begin to betray each other. Civil war erupts between generals and emperors fighting for the throne. The military, once loyal to Rome's central authority, begins to back different warlords. Each general has a private army, and the loyalty of the people is no longer certain. The Roman people, divided by factions, no longer trust their government. The economy collapses as the rich grow richer, while the poor grow more desperate. Meanwhile, the barbarians, Goths, Vandals, and Huns sense blood in the water. Can Rome's internal divisions be repaired before the barbarians tear the empire apart? Rome is no longer united in purpose. Civil war threatens to destroy what's left of the empire, while the outside world watches eagerly. The ambition of Rome's leaders could be its undoing. Will they destroy Rome from within before the barbarians even have a chance to attack? Is Rome already doomed, or is there still a chance to pull it together before it's too late? Rome is crumbling from within, but outside its borders, the barbarians are closing in. What happens when the final enemy of Rome isn't its leaders, but the very people it thought it had conquered? The barbarians have crossed the Rhine and the Danube, and now they are within striking distance of the empire's heart. The Goths, Vandals, and Franks are no longer a distant threat. They are at Rome's door. The Roman military, fragmented by civil war, is too weak to defend the empire from these foreign invaders. Once proud and mighty, Rome's walls are breached and the city itself is under threat. The emperor's inability to unite the military and their own internal conflicts make Rome's collapse inevitable. The question isn't whether Rome will fall, it's how much of the empire can be salvaged. The people of Rome feel a sense of betrayal. Their empire is broken, and there's no one left to protect them. The fall of Rome isn't a single event, it's a succession of failures, both internal and external. Can Rome be saved from its enemies? Or is this the moment of its final death blow? Will Rome be reduced to rubble by barbarians? Or will its final days be marked by an unexpected shift in power? The last Roman emperor sits on his throne, powerless. What happens when the emperor of Rome has no empire left to rule? Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, has no power. He's a puppet emperor, unable to control the fragmented territories or the growing influence of Germanic leaders. Meanwhile, the military, which had been the lifeblood of Rome, is now serving foreign rulers. Rome, once the center of the world, has become a shell of its former self. In 476 CE, Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposes the emperor and declares himself ruler of Italy. The fall of the Western Roman Empire is complete, and with it, the last vestiges of its power. But what happens when Rome's official fall occurs not through a military defeat, but through internal collapse and betrayal? Is this truly the end of Roman power? Or is this just the first chapter of a new, darker story for Europe? The empire is gone, but the legacy of Rome remains. Can the Western world move forward, or will its past forever haunt its future? With the fall of the emperor, who will take control of the remnants of Rome? The fall of Rome marks the end of an era, but the new world emerging from the ashes isn't what anyone expected. What happens when the empire that once ruled the world is replaced by fragmented kingdoms, violence, and chaos? The fall of Rome opens the door for feudalism, new kingdoms, and the rise of monarchies in Europe. The barbarians, now rulers of the lands once under Roman control, struggle to establish their own order. The Christian church fills the power vacuum, becoming a stabilizing force in the chaos. But this new world is far from the ideals of Rome. It's disordered, divided, and violent. Europe, once unified under Roman rule, is now fragmented, a patchwork of competing powers. What happens when the power of Rome is gone and a new, more unstable order rises? The empire may be gone, but Rome's shadow looms large over the future. What will become of Europe when the memory of Rome is all that's left? Has the fall of Rome led to a new beginning, or is Europe destined to repeat the mistakes of its past? The fall of the Roman Empire wasn't a single event. It was a slow, agonizing collapse driven by both internal betrayal and external pressure. It wasn't just about a barbarian invasion. It was about the fracturing of a vision, the failure of leadership, and the abandonment of the very ideals that once made Rome great. But even as the Western Roman Empire fell, its legacy remained. From its ashes, Europe would rise, shaped by the lessons of Rome's triumphs and failures. The story of Rome's decline is a warning. What happens when the most powerful empire in history doesn't just fall to invaders, but collapses from within? It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and the unpredictable nature of history. The fall of Rome marked the end of an era, but in many ways it set the stage for the world we live in today. The rise of Islam. In the solitude of the desert, a man hears a voice that shakes the heavens. But what happens when that voice tells him to change the world, and he doesn't feel ready to listen? Muhammad's life changes forever in 610 CE when the angel Gabriel, delivers the first revelation to him. But what if Muhammad didn't want this mission? The weight of the revelation is overwhelming. Not only does it threaten his way of life, it demands a radical rethinking of everything he knows. How does a man accept a divine calling when he's no more than an ordinary merchant? When his own doubts surface, when the fear of being labeled mad eats away at him, how does he reconcile the message with his own human limitations? The stakes aren't just spiritual, they're intensely personal. What happens when the messenger doubts the message? The battle isn't just with the elites of Mecca, it's within Muhammad himself. Can he embrace the mission, or will the burden of prophecy crush him before he even begins? Will the revelations drive Muhammad toward his destiny, or will they destroy his faith in himself and in the message he carries? The message spreads, but the response isn't what Muhammad expected. What happens when the world rejects you, and the very people you hope to save become your enemies? As Muhammad's message grows, so does the resistance. He's not just up against Meccan elites, he's up against family, friends, and the entire establishment of his society. The merchants of Mecca, terrified that Muhammad's message of one God will decimate their polytheistic economy, turn the city against him. What if the persecution doesn't just threaten his life, but the very survival of his growing movement? The boycott, the verbal attacks, the violence, it all builds up, and Muhammad begins to wonder if he's simply spinning his wheels. Can he continue the mission, or will the pressure of betrayal and personal loss break him? His life is on the line, and the Muslim community is fractured. What happens when persecution isn't just about survival, but about proving the validity of the entire movement? Can Muhammad keep going, or will the weight of rejection force him to question his mission? The city that birthed the movement has now become its greatest enemy. What happens when a man of faith must leave everything behind to save what he believes in? In 622 CE, the Hijra, Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina, becomes not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one. The Muslim community faces its most desperate moment. Will the migration mark a new beginning, or will it lead to their destruction? Medina offers refuge, but it also presents challenges. The tribal politics in Medina are complex, and the new community will face constant tests. As Muhammad settles in Medina, he is not just a prophet anymore. He is now the leader of a political community, which brings with it new dangers. The stakes have shifted from survival to the creation of a new order, one that could be undermined by old rivalries and tensions. The survival of Islam depends not just on faith, but on leadership, political alliances, and military strength. What happens when the fight for Islam's survival becomes more worldly than spiritual? Will Medina become a sanctuary, or will the political intrigue of this new community destroy everything Muhammad worked for? The forces of resistance are relentless, and the stakes of war are higher than ever. What happens when the pursuit of divine truth becomes intertwined with the reality of warfare? The early Muslim community in Medina is now at war, not just for survival, but for dominance. The Battle of Badr, 624 CE, is a stunning victory, but it isn't just about defeating an enemy. It's about proving that Islam isn't just a spiritual force, but a military one as well. But as the battles continue, the question arises, is Islam still a message of peace, or is it now a movement bent on conquest? As the Muslims' victories pile up, so do the costs. Muhammad's authority is cemented, but the violence that accompanies these victories begins to change the nature of the faith. Is Islam still the faith of mercy and tolerance Muhammad preached, or has it become something else entirely? The internal and external pressure on Muhammad is mounting. Can he reconcile the violence of war with the message of peace, or has the struggle for power taken over the movement entirely? Will Muhammad continue to embrace the mission, or will the brutality of war push him to embrace totalitarian rule? With the fall of Mecca, Islam's future is secured. But what happens when a single man's vision changes the world and leaves behind a legacy too massive to control? In 630 CE, the Muslims conquer Mecca. This victory isn't just military, it's symbolic. The city that rejected Islam is now its heart. But Muhammad's success is bittersweet. He has unified Arabia, but now he must hold it together. As the leader of this new world, Muhammad has not just won hearts and minds, but built an empire that stretches far beyond the borders of Arabia. The question, can his vision survive after his death? Will Islam remain united, or will internal power struggles tear it apart? The death of Muhammad in 632 CE sets off a chain reaction. Who will lead now? Islam's rise has been nothing short of revolutionary, but its future is far from certain. What happens when a movement built on one man's vision becomes an empire? Will Muhammad's legacy hold together the empire he built? Or will the forces of division fracture Islam beyond repair? The rise of Islam wasn't just about a religious movement. It was the birth of a revolutionary force that reshaped the world. From Muhammad's initial revelations to his military triumphs and the spread of Islam, the stakes were never just spiritual, they were existential. The rise of Islam was about conquering more than territories. It was about challenging the very fabric of civilization and reordering the known world. The question remains, what happens when one man's spiritual awakening leads to the birth of an empire? The Viking invasions of Europe. A single raid shatters the peace of the Christian world. What happens when the most feared warriors of the North launch an assault that no one saw coming? The Vikings have arrived, and the terror they bring is not just violence, it's uncertainty. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 CE isn't just a raid, it's a shockwave that ripples across Europe. This isn't a band of raiders looking for gold. This is a message. The Europeans are not prepared for this kind of brutality. They've heard tales of these seafaring warriors, but they never thought the scourge of the North would come to their doorstep. The monks at Lindisfarne are slaughtered, the treasures plundered, and the church desecrated. In one moment, the calm of medieval Europe is destroyed. This raid will mark the beginning of something bigger. What happens when fear begins to spread faster than the sword? Will the Vikings' terror fuel more raids? Or will Europe rise to meet this unprecedented threat? The raids spread. Now it's not just about plunder, it's about changing the landscape of Europe forever. What happens when the Vikings become more than invaders? They become founders of kingdoms. From the English coast to Ireland and France, the Vikings begin to not only raid but settle. They reshape the political and cultural landscape with each new settlement. In Dublin, they create a new trading hub. In Normandy, they forge a kingdom that will one day change the face of France. The people of Europe don't just have to contend with the Viking violence. They have to deal with the reality that these invaders are here to stay. The cultural clash is intense. What happens when the Vikings bring Norse paganism into a land steeped in Christian faith? As Vikings carve out land and kingdoms, they also force Europe to confront its own religious and political boundaries. The Viking legacy is spreading, but the deeper they settle, the more complicated the political landscape becomes. What happens when the very invaders who destroyed also create? Will Viking influence be accepted? Or will they face fierce resistance from those who fear their new order? The Vikings aren't just raiders, they are rulers. What happens when one of the greatest Viking kings, Ragnar Lodbrok, seeks to carve his own legacy in a world that is already unraveling? Ragnar Lodbrok isn't just an opportunistic raider, he's a visionary. His raids on France and England aren't just for treasure, they are part of a larger plan to establish dominance. But what if Ragnar's personal ambition isn't the only driving force? What if his family, his sons in particular, are the ones pulling him toward greatness? The family dynamics between Ragnar, his sons, and his warriors provide a backdrop for the violence that will unfold. As Ragnar becomes the legendary figure he is, the line between glory and destruction becomes thinner than ever. Can a man so driven by ambition escape the fate he's chosen for himself? Or is Ragnar's legend destined to end in tragic defeat? Ragnar's legend grows, but with it the stakes of his ambition rise. What happens when the legacy of a king is defined not by the battles he wins, but by the costs of his victories? Will Ragnar's pursuit of power lead to glory, or will it destroy him and everything he's built? A new Viking king rises with an unyielding desire to claim England as his own. What happens when the last great Viking invasion comes to England and the fate of the empire is on the line? Harald Hardrada, a king who has seen everything the world has to offer, turns his sights on England. This is no mere raid, it's an all-out invasion with ambition at its heart. Harald believes England's throne is rightfully his, and he's ready to wage war for it. But he doesn't just face the Anglo-Saxon King Harald II. He faces the legacy of Vikings who have already infiltrated the English soil. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 will be one of the most brutal and defining moments of Viking history. But the Vikings are tired. Their unity is fragile and the winds of change are blowing. This isn't just about victory, it's about survival. Can Harald claim England, or will his invasion be the final Viking defeat? The Vikings' reign in England may end here, but their cultural legacy will endure. Will the final Viking battle determine the fate of the kingdom? Or will it leave the land in chaos? Will Hardrada's invasion succeed? Or will this be the final stand of the Vikings before they are absorbed into the history of England? The Viking Age ends in defeat, but their legacy doesn't die with their armies. What happens when an empire built on raiding and pillaging turns into the foundation of a new European world? The Vikings may have lost military battles, but they conquered on a cultural scale. The Normans, descendants of Viking settlers in France, will soon invade England under William the Conqueror in 1066, bringing Viking heritage into the heart of the British monarchy. Viking influence is seen in architecture, language, and trade networks across Europe. The integration of Viking culture into European political and social systems reshapes the continent forever. But how will this new Viking-formed world deal with the shifting tides of power? Will their legacy be one of empire, or simply another chapter in the long history of conquerors? The Vikings are gone, but the world they created remains. Will the kingdoms they founded hold their ground? Or will the political landscape fracture once again? Is the Viking world dead, or does it live on in the very fabric of Europe itself? The Viking invasions were not just an era of violence and bloodshed. They were the moment when the world of Europe was irrevocably reshaped. Through conquest, settlement, and the creation of lasting legacies, the Vikings didn't just invade, they transformed. What began as raiding evolved into the building of empires, changing politics, culture, and society across Europe. By combining bloodshed with cultural assimilation, the Vikings blurred the line between destruction and creation. Their conquest may have ended, but their legacy didn't simply die with their armies. It became embedded in the foundations of modern Europe, forever changing the course of history. The story of the Vikings is the story of unpredictability, ambition, and the unrelenting power of legacy. The Vikings may have disappeared as a military force, but they left behind something far more enduring. An empire that was built not just on the sword, but on the seeds of change. What remains now is the world they shaped and the questions their rise and fall left behind. Did they conquer, or did they build? The Magna Carta, a king on the verge of ruin surrounded by enemies. What happens when the ruler of a kingdom realizes he's no longer in control and every decision could be his last? King John, fearing a rebellion that has already started to burn through his kingdom, finds himself at the brink of complete collapse. His military failures in France, excessive taxation, and oppressive rule have alienated his subjects. Trust in his leadership has evaporated. The barons, once loyal, are now gathering against him. John's grip on the throne is slipping, and he knows it. His failure to defend his land, his inability to manage his kingdom's finances, and his arrogance have led him to the point where even his closest allies are ready to betray him. But the stakes aren't just political. John's survival is now at risk. His life and legacy hang by a thread. The king's desperation grows, but the barons are coming for him. This isn't just about the throne. It's about John's very life. Can he hold on to power, or will his own failure and insecurity lead him to disaster? Will John break, or will he double down on his reign of tyranny? The king's pride has pushed his people too far. What happens when a once unified kingdom begins to tear itself apart and the forces of rebellion rise to challenge the crown? The barons, led by Archbishop Stephen Langton, seize the moment. They are no longer just protesting, they are plotting. In the dark of night, they begin to gather in secret, united by the singular goal of limiting King John's power. They demand freedom, fairness, and the restoration of ancient rights that John has trampled upon. This is no longer about grievances. It's a war for the very future of England. The vulnerabilities of the crown become clear, and the rebellion grows stronger, pushing John to the edge. If he doesn't comply, he risks losing everything, not just his throne, but his life. The rebellion is gaining momentum, and John's refusal to compromise could be his downfall. The clock is ticking, and every hour of resistance risks plunging the kingdom into chaos. Can John find a way to quell the rebellion, or has he pushed his kingdom too far? A king forced to surrender. What happens when absolute power is shattered by the demands of those he once ruled? June 15th, 1215, at Runnymede. John is faced with a humiliating moment. The Magna Carta, a document that will strip him of his absolute control, is forced upon him. The barons' demands are clear: limit the king's power, ensure justice, and restore the rights of the people. John, humiliated and unable to hold off the barons any longer, is forced to sign the document. But the stakes are high. This document isn't just a list of demands. It's the end of a king's tyranny and the beginning of a new era in governance. What happens when the king, desperate to hold on to power, signs an agreement that could undo his reign and forever change the nature of kingship? The Magna Carta's power isn't in its words, it's in the force behind it. Will John hold to his word, or will the fragile peace shatter? Can John live up to the promises he's just made, or will his betrayal soon lead to an even deeper conflict? A king humiliated by his own actions. What happens when John, unable to bear the consequences of the Magna Carta, decides to break his promise, and the kingdom plunges into chaos once again? The ink on the Magna Carta is barely dry when John, unable to swallow his defeat, seeks to tear it apart. The Pope invalidates it, and John wages war against the barons, launching a series of ruthless campaigns to crush the rebellion. The betrayal is complete. The barons, having trusted the king's word, now face his treachery. The kingdom is plunged back into civil war. The trust once established by the Magna Carta is shattered, and the political future of England is thrown into complete uncertainty. John's actions are not just a break in a contract, they are a breakdown of society itself. The barons are now fighting for their very existence. The Magna Carta may have been signed, but it hasn't brought peace. It's ignited war. Will the barons rally together and defeat John's forces? Or is England doomed to eternal chaos? Is England on the verge of collapse? Or will the barons rise up and reclaim their rights? A kingdom torn apart by betrayal. What happens when the broken promises of a king give birth to a legacy that will shape the future of England and the world? King John's final collapse comes in 1216 when he dies unexpectedly, and his son, Henry III, ascends to the throne. The Magna Carta has failed to bring immediate peace, but its principles endure. What was once a piece of paper used to limit a king's power becomes the cornerstone of modern constitutional law. Over the centuries, the Magna Carta influences constitutional movements, including the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It has become a symbol of limited government, individual rights, and the rule of law. The document that was originally meant to serve the interests of the barons has now become a legacy for the entire world. The Magna Carta's true power was not in the moment it was signed, but in its ability to shape centuries of political thought. How will its principles continue to evolve? Will the Magna Carta's ideas spread across the globe, or will they remain a footnote in the history of England? The Magna Carta was more than just a document. It was a clash of wills that changed the course of history. King John's betrayal and the Barons' rebellion forced a dramatic shift in the balance of power, and the Magna Carta became a symbol for centuries to come. What began as a king's forced submission turned into a legacy of liberty that would influence the development of constitutional law and the principles of democracy worldwide. The Magna Carta didn't just limit the power of a monarch, it laid the foundation for a new world order where the people, not the ruler, would hold ultimate power. Even in John's moment of betrayal, the ideas of freedom, justice, and government accountability were born, creating a revolutionary framework that would inspire generations. The Black Death, a ship sails into port, bringing with it an invisible terror that no one can comprehend. What happens when the most deadly force in human history enters the world through a single, unnoticed crack? The Black Death arrives in Europe in 1347, brought by merchants who have no idea what they carry. The first victims, sailors on a trading ship, fall ill, but no one understands the scope of the danger. In Messina, the first whispers spread. A plague is coming. Panic grips the city as the bubonic plague begins its silent spread. No one can stop it. No one knows what it is. And the fear of the unknown is worse than the disease itself. As more ships arrive with death on board, the question becomes, how long can Europe last before it succumbs to this invisible force? This isn't just about disease, it's about panic. What happens when death spreads faster than the human mind can grasp? Will Europe crumble, or will they find a way to fight back against something they can't even understand? Can Europe withstand this unseen terror, or has it already sealed its fate? The plague spreads like wildfire, sweeping through Europe's heartlands. What happens when the streets, once teeming with life, turn to empty tombs? In the wake of the plague's initial appearance, Europe begins to fall apart. Cities die, towns are abandoned, and the death toll mounts with each passing day. Buboes appear, and fever strikes without mercy. Churches, once the pillars of hope and salvation, are full of bodies. But no one can answer the questions. Why is this happening? The idea that God is punishing humanity causes panic, but fear doesn't stop the plague. There's no cure, no understanding of how to fight it, and soon the question isn't how many will die. It's who will survive. The barons, peasants, and even kings fall victim. The idea of survival turns into a primal fight. Families abandoned, cities crumbling. This isn't just a disease, it's everything people once relied on coming undone. Can humanity make it out of this? Or is Europe doomed to fade into history? With half the population dead, how will the survivors rebuild their world? Or is this the end of their civilization? The old world has collapsed, but something even darker is taking root. What happens when a society fractures so deeply that it's impossible to pick up the pieces. As the plague rages, the structures that held European society together begin to fail. Feudalism, once the backbone of life, falters as landlords lose control of their estates. The peasants, fewer in number but more demanding, begin to demand higher wages and freedom. The labor shortages create a new dynamic of power. The church loses influence as its members are decimated, and populations that once served God are now seeking answers elsewhere. Scapegoats are hunted, Jews, foreigners, blamed for bringing the plague. Violence erupts. Trust in every system, from religion to government, is broken. But beneath the chaos, something new begins to stir. A new economic order where the old social rules no longer apply. The old ways are dying, but what will emerge in their place? Will the survivors rebuild, or will the old power structures come crashing down forever? Is there any hope for Europe to find a new balance, or will the madness of the plague destroy it beyond repair? In the wake of death, the world doesn't return to normal. What happens when power, wealth, and opportunity shift dramatically and the old guard loses its grip? The barons are losing their hold on land and labor as the surviving peasants demand more for their work. The middle class is emerging, wealth is being redistributed, and the feudal system is on the verge of collapse. In a world where the nobility was once the backbone of society, the Black Death's death toll now gives ordinary men and women a chance to seize power. The rising middle class, the laborers, and even the formerly powerless start to claim their rights, bargaining with a wealthier position than before. The church's influence begins to wane, and new ideologies take root in the vacuum left behind. But even as hope springs for some, desperation grows for others. A new order's emerging, but how will it all play out? Will this new world be better than the one that came before, or will it fall apart just as quickly? Will this be a world where the peasants rise up, or will the old elite claw their way back to the top? The plague is over, but the scars remain. What happens when a once great society is left broken, but something new begins to rise from the ashes? The plague may have ended, but its effects continue to reverberate. Europe is forever changed, its population reduced, its social structure remade, and its religious authority shaken. What comes next is a revolution in thinking, in politics, in economics. The Renaissance is born from the void left by the Black Death. But will it be a true rebirth, or will it be the same old power structure with a new coat of paint? The new opportunities have led to innovation, but Europe remains scarred. While modernity emerges, old wounds threaten to reopen. The plague may be over, but what happens next will determine whether Europe survives or sinks into chaos again. Will the Renaissance become the dawn of a new era, or will the power of the old world pull it back into darkness? The Black Death didn't just change Europe, it shattered it. It wasn't just a plague, it was a radical force of transformation that altered the way people thought about life, death, and society. What began as a moment of destruction set the stage for the birth of modern Europe, where power, economics, and ideas would forever shift. Yet the Black Death left scars that would take generations to heal. The true legacy of the plague isn't in the death toll or the immediate chaos. It's in the long-term reordering of society. The world it left behind was unrecognizable, but it was alive with possibility. The question remains, was the Black Death the end of one world or the beginning of another? The fall of Constantinople. The city stands as a symbol of the ancient world, immovable, indomitable, and proud. But what happens when a centuries-old empire faces an enemy it cannot defeat? The gates of Constantinople stand tall, guarding an empire that has lasted for over 1,000 years. But Emperor Constantine XI knows the end is near. The Ottoman Empire, under the ambitious and ruthless Sultan Mehmed II, has begun its march toward the city. Constantinople is isolated. All attempts for help from the West have failed, and Constantine is staring into the abyss. He must decide: fight to the last or watch his people perish. As the Ottomans approach, Constantine's heart sinks. He knows the walls will not hold forever. Will the Byzantine Empire, the last beacon of the Roman legacy, fall without a trace, or will it find the strength to survive one last stand? The calm of the ancient city hides the tension building beneath. Can Constantine rally his people, or is the death of the Byzantine Empire written in the stars? With no hope of help, can Constantine rally his forces, or will his city fall before the Ottoman army even reaches the gates? The ground trembles as the siege begins. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and the earth itself seems to crack under the pressure? Mehmed II's massive army surrounds Constantinople, and the siege begins. The Ottomans bring with them a super cannon capable of tearing down the ancient walls of the city. As the artillery begins to strike, the defenders realize that their precious defenses, the very walls that once made Constantinople the envy of the world, are being reduced to rubble. Constantine watches in horror as his last bastion of hope starts to crumble. But what truly gnaws at the soul of Constantine and his people is the silence, the overwhelming sense that their fate is no longer in their hands. The fear of inevitable defeat creeps into every corner of the city. The walls may be falling, but so is their resolve. The Ottoman forces push forward, relentless, but Constantine refuses to give up. Will the Byzantine spirit withstand the relentless assault, or is this the end of their century-old defiance? Can the defenders hold the city, or will the walls give way, and the city fall into the hands of the invaders? A king's last hope turns to betrayal. What happens when the world turns its back on you, and your final chance for survival slips through your fingers? With the Ottomans pressing in, Constantine's last plea is answered by nothing but silence. Western Europe, already caught up in its own political struggles, refuses to send the promised aid. The papal promises and the Venetian fleet, so carefully awaited, never arrive. Constantine's despair deepens as the empire's last hope evaporates. Betrayal feels like the final blow. The Western Christians, despite their supposed allegiance, have left the Eastern Empire to die. The idea of religious unity falls apart, and the very church Constantine has upheld betrays him. As Constantinople's gates fall, he realizes that his empire is not just losing a battle, it is losing faith itself. Constantine's distrust of the West grows, but even more devastating is the reality that he must now face the Ottoman army alone. Will the emperor's honor be enough to protect the city, or will betrayal be their final downfall? With no help on the way, can Constantine hold on to his last remaining strength, or is this the final moment for the Byzantine Empire? The city's last hope is gone. What happens when the inevitable becomes reality, and an ancient empire crumbles to dust beneath the weight of its own collapse? The Ottoman forces breach Constantinople's walls. The final moments of resistance are desperate and brutal. Constantine XI leads his soldiers into battle, but the odds are insurmountable. As the Ottomans pour into the city, 1,000 years of history, culture, and faith is lost in an instant. The streets are flooded with the blood of the defenders, and the Byzantine world ends in an orgy of violence. Mehmed, victorious, enters the city. The Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque, and the symbol of the Christian East is permanently silenced. The fall of Constantinople marks the end of an era. But with this loss, something more is born. The Ottoman Empire rises, and Europe will never be the same. The fall of Constantinople isn't just a loss for the Byzantines. It's the beginning of a new age in the East. What will this new empire mean for the future of Europe? And how will the West respond? With Constantinople lost, what becomes of the world? Can the Ottomans keep their empire intact, or will the same fate await them in the future? An empire crumbles, but its legacy is far from gone. What happens when the world shifts, and what is lost gives birth to something new? The Ottomans, now masters of the city, begin their campaign to reshape the world. Mehmed II embarks on an expansionist policy, turning Constantinople into a thriving center of trade, culture, and Islamic power. But as the Ottomans rise, the loss of Constantinople leaves a deep scar on Europe's psyche. The fall accelerates the age of exploration as European powers begin to search for new trade routes to bypass Ottoman control. The Renaissance is also born out of this darkness, as scholars flee the Ottoman Empire and bring ancient knowledge to the West. The Ottoman Empire, now a rising power, will clash with Europe for centuries to come. But what will be the long-term effects of the fall of Constantinople? Can the Ottomans maintain their control, or will Europe reclaim its place? With Constantinople under Ottoman rule, how will Europe respond? Will they rise to challenge the new power, or be swallowed whole by the tide of change? The fall of Constantinople wasn't just the fall of a city, it was the shattering of a world order. What began as the last desperate stand of an empire turned into the birth of a new global balance. The Ottomans' victory marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of a powerful new force in the world, while Europe was forced into a new era of exploration, scientific discovery, and cultural transformation. It wasn't just the physical walls that fell that day, but the concept of a Christian East, one that had lasted for over 1,000 years. As Constantinople became the heart of the Ottoman Empire, Europe's center shifted to the West. The fall of the city was the beginning of an entirely new world. What now? The world had changed forever, and no one could anticipate the next chapter in the epic saga of history, the American Revolution, the calm before the storm. What happens when a people, worn down by decades of oppression, finally snap and decide to risk everything for a new world? The year is 1775, and the colonies have had enough. King George III's policies have pushed the colonies to the edge. The people of America are caught between their loyalty to the crown and their desperate need for change. Tensions boil over when the British march to Lexington and Concord, and the first shots of the Revolutionary War ring out. But this isn't just about guns and soldiers. It's about identity, pride, and freedom. The stakes are high. If they lose, it's total destruction. The colonies have no standing army, no resources, and no guarantee of success. They are outnumbered, under-equipped, and fighting against one of the greatest empires in history. The revolution may be starting, but the colonists are still unsure about what they are truly fighting for. Independence or merely survival? Can the colonies pull together for one final stand, or will the dream of freedom crumble before it even begins? The fight begins, but the battle has only just begun. What happens when hope fades and the reality of war becomes an unrelenting monster? The colonial army, led by George Washington, faces defeat after defeat. Morale plummets as soldiers are poorly equipped, undertrained, and underfed. Washington's leadership is questioned. As the British dominate in battles like Bunker Hill and Brooklyn, Washington must find a way to keep his army intact. The Continental Army is falling apart, and Washington's leadership is being tested to its limits. But despite the losses, something shifts. The idea of freedom begins to take root in the hearts of the soldiers. Washington makes a risky decision. He strikes at Trenton, crossing the Delaware River on Christmas night. The surprise attack is a stunning success. The tide turns. But this victory is a double-edged sword. Washington now has one chance to prove that the revolution can survive. The revolutionaries have a glimmer of hope. But what happens when winter's brutal cold and retribution from the British come crashing down? Can Washington hold the fragile thread of revolution, or will it snap under pressure? Will the Continental Army fall apart again, or can Washington prove that victory is within reach? What happens when the world's greatest empire faces a force of nature they never anticipated? The American cause shifts with the arrival of unexpected allies. The turning point in the war comes when France, long wary of British power, decides to back the American colonies. The victory at Saratoga convinces the French to send troops, supplies, and naval power to aid the colonists. Now the revolution is no longer a rebellion, it's a global war. With French support, the Continental Army gains the upper hand. However, this isn't just a political victory, it's a gamble. The colonies must prove they can hold their ground against the might of the British Empire, which is now distracted by conflict on multiple fronts. The war is no longer about just winning, it's about survival, and the stakes have never been higher. The French join the fight, but their involvement doesn't come without strings attached. What does this mean for the colony's future? Is this alliance a saving grace, or is it a trap that will eventually bind America to European powers? With foreign support on the horizon, will Washington and his army be able to keep their independence? Or will the weight of European involvement drag them into a new form of control? The final showdown is upon them. What happens when the last battle is fought and the fate of a nation rests on one last, desperate effort? The decisive moment comes at Yorktown, with French forces joining the fight and Washington's Continental Army closing in. The British forces, led by General Cornwallis, are trapped. The siege of Yorktown is not just a battle, it's the final test of the revolution. Washington knows that victory here will mean everything: independence, freedom, and the birth of a new nation. Cornwallis surrenders in October 1781, and with it, the revolution is over. But while the military victory is secured, the political and economic consequences are only beginning. The Treaty of Paris will recognize the United States, but the cost of the war, in lives, resources, and futures, is staggering. The war is over, but what happens next? The birth of a nation is far from peaceful. The revolution has been won, but can the newly formed United States survive its own internal contradictions? Will the United States truly be free? Or will the seeds of division and instability tear the new nation apart? The dust of war has settled, but the battle for the soul of the new nation has only just begun. What happens when a country is born not from unity, but from a patchwork of conflicting ideals? The American Revolution was more than a military victory. It was a test of principles and ideals. The United States was born from the revolutionary ideas of freedom, equality, and democracy, but these ideals were never easy to apply. The Constitution must now be forged, and the debates over government, whether a democracy or a republic, how to balance power, are just beginning. The early United States is fragile, with factions already forming. Slavery remains a glaring contradiction, and the relationship with Europe is far from stable. The battle for true freedom will continue long after the guns of war fall silent. The revolution has led to independence, but will the United States live up to its ideals, Or will it fall into the same patterns of tyranny it sought to escape? Will the ideals of liberty and equality stand the test of time? Or will the new nation struggle to live up to its promise? The American Revolution was a story of resilience, betrayal, and ideals. The revolution wasn't just about breaking away from Britain, it was about forging a new world based on freedom. But freedom came with a price. What began as an insurgency grew into a global struggle that reshaped the world. But the battle for independence was only the beginning. The legacy of the revolution was a new question. Can a nation built on such lofty ideals survive the reality of politics, economics, and human imperfection? What now? The American Revolution didn't just mark the birth of the United States, it redefined the idea of democracy and freedom, and its long-lasting impacts would echo for centuries to come. But it also left the unanswered question, will the dream of a just society endure? Or will the forces of power and division ultimately tear the nation apart? Only time will tell the dark truth of progress and what comes next. We've spent centuries chasing progress, but what have we truly achieved? Civilization is not the bright, shining beacon of hope that we often paint it to be. It is a gritty, bloody, and unpredictable journey. From the earliest agricultural revolutions that bound us to the earth, to the empires that destroyed entire civilizations in their wake, to the technological advancements that are as much about control and destruction as they are about progress. The history of humanity is not a linear story of success. It is a collection of tragedies, compromises, and unanswered questions. Our past is stained with the blood of conquest. The fall of empires, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Ming Dynasty reveals the brutal truth. No civilization lasts forever. We have built magnificent cities only to watch them burn in the fires of war, invasion, and betrayal. Every great achievement in history has come at a cost. The lives of the oppressed, the enslaved, and the marginalized. We're quick to celebrate the victories of history, but have we really learned from the price of those victories? Consider the wars that have defined human history. The world wars reshaped the globe, leaving in their wake not just physical devastation, but psychological scars that still affect millions today. The Cold War brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. The question remains, are we really any different now, as we stand on the edge of technological revolution, climate catastrophe, and geopolitical turmoil? Even now, as we race toward artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, in a future where technology might surpass human ability to control it, we must ask, are we building a future of liberation and equality, or are we on the cusp of a new form of oppression, one born not of monarchy, but of technological dictatorships? We see how quickly power can be manipulated in the age of surveillance and data control, and how easily corporations and governments can strip away individual freedoms under the guise of progress. We cannot ignore the injustice that continues to haunt us. Racism, inequality, and exploitation have been the underbelly of civilization since its very beginnings. We've built great empires on the backs of slaves and conquered peoples, and yet the struggles for equality are far from over. Gender inequality, racial discrimination, and economic disparity are not relics of the past. They are deep-rooted forces still embedded in our societies, from the greatest democracies to the most authoritarian regimes. Can we truly move forward without addressing these foundational problems? Or will we repeat the same mistakes, hiding behind a facade of progress? The planet itself is also bearing the weight of our civilization. The environmental destruction we have caused, through industrialization, deforestation, and climate change, is a consequence of our relentless desire to grow, consume, and control. For all our technological advancements, we are facing an existential crisis. Will the planet we built our civilizations upon still sustain us? Or are we merely speeding toward our own self-destruction, blinded by our arrogance and short-term desires? History is not just a reflection of the past, it is a guide, a warning of what's to come. We have the ability to change, to forge a new path, but the choices are ours. We are at a crossroads, a place where civilization can either flourish or collapse. Will we rise above our past mistakes and create a future based on true justice, equity, and sustainability? Or will we continue on the path of self-destruction, propelled by greed, power, and short-sightedness? This is not the end of the story, it's only the beginning. The world is still in our hands, but the question remains, what kind of world will we leave behind? The next chapter is ours to write, but it will come at a cost. Are we ready to pay it? Only time will tell. The world is at a crossroads. History is not just happening, it is being shaped right now by people like you. The choices we make today will determine whether civilization rises or falls. Do you want to watch as the future unfolds, or do you want to be the one who forges it? The world has never been more fragile, and the systems we've relied on for centuries are crumbling. Democracy, freedom, justice, they are all under siege. The very foundation of what we consider civilization is at risk, and we are running out of time. Subscribe now if you are ready to be part of a movement that doesn't just study history but shapes it. This isn't about passive reflection, it's about active change. Like, comment, and share if you're not content with the world as it is. Let's create a legacy, not of mere survival, but of transformation.